So part two, so like I said, we have lightest to darkest, going in that order. Just be mindful of which side is the lightest and what side is the darkest. Alright, so move this out of the way. Make sure that's in the middle. Okay. Alright, so what I have now, which is a lot of stuff, it seems like. So I have paper towels again, got my palette, got my water cup over here, got my palette full of ink, different shades and tints and all that good stuff, different grays, got my drawing paper with my apple already drawn, have my photograph, and then I'm going to keep this out for reference. So if you want to, we showed this before, you can circle or number which one's the lightest. So this one was number 1, this was number 2, 3, so go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I know that's complicated, but if you did yours a little bit more neatly, that's fine. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which is 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so this, if you keep this out, I know every day is going to be different. If you start today and you work 30, 40 minutes and then take a break, clean up, and then start again tomorrow, you can't really save your palette too much. You can try to set it to the side, put something over it like saran wrap to cover it, but it's really hard to save it. So tomorrow, if you decide to do this part, start on it, and then tomorrow you have to start again. You probably have to go back to part 1 and do this step over, unless you save it, which is really hard to do. So I'm going to keep this out as a reference just at the top, just to know what shades and different grays I have on my drawing. So one thing about ink wash, I want you to start off light, just like watercolor, then work our way to the dark. If we do dark first, you cannot lighten up what you already put down. So it's better to start very light and go a little bit at a time every time you add a layer on top of a layer. So everything that we're going to do, if you started with color pencil or watercolor, what else have we done? Oil pastels, even shading and cross hatching, we're building up from layer to layer. So I also want you to think, how do we get from this color to this color, as in layers? So we're building layers on top of layers of color and grays to get dimension in that value that we've been talking about for all these different materials. So we're learning about how to build how to create value using different materials, and by doing that, by using our different materials, we are learning how to build that type of value from lightest to darkest. So if you look at any of the other videos for the apples, you've noticed that I start off really light and build on top of that. Anyway, so I'm going to start looking at the lights, but look at the white part. So there's a very white part of the apple, a very shiny part. A light source is just directly on it, on this part right here. But if you look in that, there's some really like straight white, but it's mostly a very light gray. So that might be my number 1. but maybe I want to leave this whole section white to begin with. Also, inside the stem, where the stem comes in, there's some very white parts. And if you want to look at all the dots, there's a lot of dots on the apple. I wouldn't worry about those right now. We can always go back with acrylic paint and do those on top, just to add those little dots of highlights. So what I'm going to do first is just do a very light wash, which is my number 1, which is the lightest gray that I have, all over the thing, the whole thing, except this part right here and around inside the stem. Alright, so that gives us a base coat of a very light gray. And this spot right here was because I had a drop of the water and it just didn't dry, so don't worry about that. Alright, so another thing we got to think about is between each layer we have to wait a couple minutes for it to dry. So right now, I don't know if you can see from my side, it's a little bit of a gloss. It's just because of the wetness of the first coat. So I'm gonna wait a few seconds, wait for it to dry a little bit, and as we build up, we're gonna have to start taking longer and longer breaks for it to dry between coats and layers. That's where we're going to start getting the depth. Okay, so that's the lightest of the light. So I got to start figuring out what's the next layer to my apple. So I'm going to start looking at, if I decide this spot right here is going to be my number 1, so the side of the apple to the bottom, to the other side, might be my number 2 color, or number 3. Like I said, you can always add. If you go to straight number, let's say I go all the way to this, it's really hard to get back to the lighter colors, or lighter grays, not really colors. Alright, so I'm going to give this a minute to dry and I'll turn it back on for the next part.